So we move on then to analysing Belfast Confetti, an excellent poem, brilliant use of structure, and a great play with punctuation in this one. So we start with the title, as we should. Obviously, Belfast Confetti here is a very ironic title because confetti is supposed to be a mark of celebration or a mark of happiness, something that people are actually enjoying. And then obviously what follows, during the wedding and obviously the honeymoon, etc., is supposed to be kind of glorious and happy, but obviously it's being used ironically here because everything that kind of it rains down on them is agony-inducing and terrible, and obviously what follows in his treatment and obviously the troubles in Northern Ireland that stems from events such as this is really poor as well. So the irony of the title. So we go to the very first thing, and it opens very dramatically in the fact that it uses the word suddenly, and this is very unique it's very unique amongst the poems we're doing in this cluster anyway, simply because it puts us right in the middle of the action, and we've just got to kind of get on board with the disorientation of the writer straight away. And also it tells us a lot about the life at the time, that there was a constant violence and danger in Northern Ireland. Obviously this could be a daily event, a daily occurrence. Then we've got the punctuation used as an image. It's a really interesting feature of the structure here. Just after he mentions rapid fire, we've got these three full stops, which kind of show bullets or gunfire, like bam, 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 just kind of coming off there. And obviously the punctuation throughout, it actually just really controls the pace, especially towards the second half, where it's kind of very bitty and the confusion is actually becoming more and more intense. Obviously here he knows he just has to get away from this, but then as he actually tries to get away, he just starts to be trapped, and you can see that there's a lot more punctuation here. It's just very short sentences, and the full stops are kind of holding him in. So that's a really interesting reference there. Yes, which is exactly what I was saying. So the short sentences here are obviously where he gets closed in, and the ending here that's really interesting is not actually his. So he's actually asked, what's his name, where am I coming from, where am I going? So basically the voice that's coming through to us here is obviously the British officers who are actually holding him in place, interrogating him, and that's really interesting because it kind of shows that the solution to this problem isn't really in his hands. Not to say it's in the hands of the British at all. It's just that there's not much he can do about it. He's in his hometown, yet he's being asked where's he from, where's he going, and obviously that's very strange because in one's hometown, they're supposed to be free and at will to do as they wish, within rights. But here, he's stopped and he's treated like the foreigner, and that's probably alludes to some of the ideas of his disorientation throughout, and the idea of his confusion, and it obviously stuttering here, not being able to kind of complete exactly what it is he wants to do, not just what he wants to say. And again, I think I've mentioned this as well. This is the structure is obviously in real time. The explosion happens, the riot squads move in, he starts, all the nuts and bolts are all still flying around, obviously just settling, and he just tries to get away, but everything starts to close in on him, etc. And that happens within a couple of minutes, and it's really interesting. Kind of, when I say real time, I don't mean to the second. I just mean like we're getting a snapshot of a moment, like captured in there through this monologue. So we move on then to the meaning. So obviously we've got the idea of the violence and the danger. Obviously the riot squads coming in. Obviously the riot squads aren't known for just being easy-handed, but then moreover the bomb that's blown up and all the stuff, the homemade bomb that's blown up and all the stuff that's actually just kind of flown out of it. The explosion, leaves a big mark, in the ground where it's actually exploded, etc. And obviously there's the rapid fire of perhaps guns in alongside it, etc. So again, all of that is violence and danger, and that's something he's trying to get away with. Another meaning we've got in here, I wouldn't say he's blaming, or at least the allusion to, obviously showing responsibility perhaps, but not an outright blaming of. He actually remembers, all the places which are streets, obviously. Sorry, the last one, at least the last two are definitely streets, but here he's referencing the other periods or other times where British colonial forces have also had people, and obviously that was a general and a field marshal, and obviously places where the British colonial forces have actually waged war and battle, etc., with disastrous results for people, and perhaps that's his comment on the situation in Northern Ireland. Obviously maybe he sees it as a British problem. You have to read more about the writer's politics to come to your own decision about that. Then we have the idea, the meaning, the feeling of disorientation the whole way through, and that's clear to us in the fact that he can't gather his can't gather his ideas together of what he wants to do, and so he's just kind of moving away. Maybe it's just a sentence, what he thinks about this initially, or what he wants to, as well as what he wants to do, and then everywhere's kind of stopped and blocked off to him, so he doesn't. He can't get to where he actually wants to go, and though he knows this labyrinth so well, and obviously all the places named, he can't escape. He doesn't know what he doesn't know what he can do, because every move is being held together or held from him by someone else, and every time he tries to go down somewhere, then he's at a dead end again. And obviously the reference there to the Crimea is a battle that didn't end very well for the British. Again, the idea of the response, it comes through to us as well. And the thing that's important, even though it might be slightly more of a secondary idea or thing that's coming through, is it's just the idea that governments or people in power, people in control, have to respond to whatever it is that's going on, and we see this response being immediate. So there's an idea of trying to keep the peace, or at least trying to marshal, or trying to catch criminals, or however you want to put it, whichever side of the fence that you're looking at this from. So obviously the riot squad come in, and then they close off all these places, and they start naming, asking the person. So it's very faceless, nameless, and distant when it's the riot squad. He can get away from them, and then as they actually close up his own city to him, it becomes more confining, and then finally he's kind of put up against the wall and asked, where are you coming from, where are you going, and what's your name. So it's again just showing the idea of the response of the government, and obviously what they did. And again, it's inviting us to think about the this is a common daily theme with the Troubles in Northern Ireland. When we look then at the images were presented, well, we've got the shrapnel, obviously all the things flying around through the explosion. Obviously it's put to us as it's raining, exclamation marks. We've got the idea of the guy being lost and trapped, and the images in that he's lost in terms of in his mind, he can't really make head nor sense of this as it goes, and he doesn't know which way is best to go, because everywhere he goes he finds that he's stopped, etc. And he actually used the word he can't escape, and every time he tries to do anything, he's punctuated and actually trapped there. So that's satisfying those two. And then the images, I think this is really just a really great play on words. He's got all these uses of punctuation in using them as shapes to actually talk about how he's being held. And I just want to break and talk about that for a minute, what that could be, especially because he talks about the fount of broken type. Most of it's exclamation marks, but here we've got the fount of broken type as well. So the idea could be that what we're looking at is communication trouble, the breakdown in communication that happened time and time again, and that's really what is stopping us here. So the lack of communication in a way has caused all this blockage, the literal lack of communication, not being able to actually discuss things properly, is causing all this punctuation deluge everywhere else in the explosion and the roadblocks, etc. And that could be an idea of what he's actually saying. And he uses I think that's why he uses or you could argue that's why he uses, should I say, the punctuation here, because we've got the exclamation mark, and we've got the full stops and colons, obviously kind of the shape of the barricades that are actually being put up, and we've got the explosion is an asterisk on the map, hinting that this could be an anomaly, or leading to a footnote in communication. Obviously things that haven't been discussed or actually agreed upon. There definitely is something in that, and I would go further with that line of inquiry. It is really interesting. So we move on then to language, and obviously we've got the whole list here of battles and wars and streets. It's kind of interplay on the words. Again, it's kind of mentioning history. It's mentioning key players, and it's mentioning that it's all kind of been brought to him on his home turf. And I think that's really interesting as well, because it's kind of showing that this is historically a problem. It's never kind of been like the British colonial empire was never one of just kind of peace and tranquility. It's always had something to do with kind of war and obviously overcoming stuff, but how do you build an empire without doing that? The idea of the fount, yes, that's kind of alluded, I've kind of touched upon this already, but the fount here, obviously there's somewhere where it's emanating from, or obviously just something splurging out in like a fountain of. So here we can have the broken type, and that's the key element, I think, to the lack of communication, or the breakdown in communication. So here, the breakdown in communication has resulted in this, or this is resulting in a breakdown of communication, whichever way you want to look at it. But that broken type, so you can imagine all the words, of kind of peace processes and peace process and discussions that politicians were having, or that people were saying, and obviously that just exploding, just being broken. And now there's the words in this situation are quite useless. And yeah, obviously the use of punctuation throughout, kind of, like I mentioned earlier, just kind of hold us in, kind of keeps us penned up. So what kind of effect does this have? Actually, one more thing I want to point out in language is this one here, dead end again. And obviously that's not only a reference to him trying to escape this, get out of it, but trying to get out of the whole situation in terms of, the troubles, when is this going to end? How is this going to stop? How is this going to come to a conclusion? So every time, the peace talks, when you hear it on the news, actually says that we've got, we go to another dead end. So it's sometimes they were used to say that, you come to another dead end, and obviously there's been a stall in communications and negotiations, etc. And obviously that's alluding there to the repetition of that as well, not just the fact that he can't get out of here, but that the country as a whole can't get out of this situation, and communicating isn't really cutting it. So we move on then to the effect of the reader. Well, obviously it gives some insight into the daily life during the Troubles, and obviously how people had to live, and obviously the way they had to actually try and shape themselves, especially with this last one. Everyone just under suspicion, and everyone's being questioned and interrogated, etc. And then we've got the sense of him being trapped, and obviously you get that from obviously all the way through, like we've said many times about the punctuation, and obviously his recounting of it. But in the last section with the questions as well, it's important to note that here he's trapped in his own city, and that's different than just being trapped abroad, trapped somewhere else. Being trapped in your own city must have a huge psychological effect on you, because obviously you can't move freely where you are. You can't have like a safe space to call your own there. That's obviously going to be hugely problematic, and also gives the idea of life under surveillance, because there's no way that a riot team or a government could actually kind of just haphazardly put this in. There's a whole section of procedures in place. If anything like this happens, then these are the following things are actually going to happen. The following things are actually going to occur. So it actually keeps the people well under surveillance, and that's again an insight into life during the Troubles. And really original poem.